Welcome to Dare, the show for innovators, entrepreneurs, and startup leaders who dare to shape the future. Your hosts today are Ned Hayes and Cecilia Mariani. Dare is brought to you by Darwaf, the superpower tech team that can make your vision a reality. The Dare podcast is excited to welcome Asim Razzaq to the show. He's a senior leader in the tech industry. He's CEO at Yotascale, a cloud cost management platform. And he has years of experience in the field working at PayPal and a number of other great companies. We're really excited to have Asim with us today to talk about cloud management solutions, how to bring solutions to scale, and how to grow in this rapidly evolving landscape. So welcome to the show.
Thanks, Nat. Glad to be here.
So first of all, tell us about your company. How did it come to be founded and what's your vision?
Yeah, Yotascale really is a outcome of my love-hate relationship with cloud computing. So as you mentioned, a senior leader in the industry, I've been a head of platform engineering at companies like PayPal and eBay and a number of other early, mid-stage, late-stage startups. And as you know, in 2007, there was advent of cloud computing. So the problem shifted from CapEx, where you own the data center, to OpEx, where you now rent this equipment, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that was great because it gives you a lot of agility, a lot of flexibility. But at the same time, it created this headache for the heads of platform engineering who were responsible for this infrastructure. And then they would enable the application teams to leverage it, right? So I firsthand experienced the problem myself in the roles that I was in, which was that the monkey was always on my back. As a head of platform engineering, the CFOs and the finance departments are always asking you like, hey, why are you spending all this money? And you're trying to explain, well, I'm not the one spending this money. All these other teams are spending all this money. And so I think the challenge was that it came down to sort of my disappointment, my personal disappointment with the promise of cloud computing and the reality of it, right? So the promise of cloud computing was that it's going to be purely elastic, and then you basically just pay for what you use, and it shrinks when you don't use it, it expands when you do use it, and things of that nature, right? But the reality of it is that a lot of that onus of how do you shrink the cloud that you're using and what you use and how you use it, it really comes down to you. And I think that's a lot of the context and premise behind the genesis of the company. And that disappointment in terms of that onus being on the operators that are renting all of these services in the cloud was what led me to start the company. And one of the episodes I had was in a mid to late stage startup where we were in the data center. We were actually spending a ton of money in the data center. And I was in a board meeting where it was explained to me, it was early on in my job at the company, that the more than 60% of the company's entire expense was going into the data center. Wow. And I was asked as the cloud guy to say, hey, why don't you take us into cloud and save us a bunch of money and make things efficient? So I tried my level best to do that, to take the company into public cloud. But I realized very quickly that it actually would end up being a little more expensive for us when we did all the modeling. And not just that, but also I would have to up-level the talent, bring in people who understood the cloud, who understood this new paradigm of doing things, and anything that we asked for in terms of manageability of it. Like, hey, can you project? Can we forecast how much it's going to cost us? Can we understand what's costing us what? Was left to us, which was like, well, you go figure that out. And so to kind of contextualize that cost with respect to our business became our responsibility, right? And so I wasn't able to solve that problem just because we didn't have enough time. They had given us 6 months and it just did not seem like we could solve it in 6 months. So we solved the problem differently by using commodity hardware. But that issue stuck with me to say, like, how come, a startup could have been saved by going into the cloud, but it just ended up being a difficult problem. So I think that was one of the key turning points for me to go do something about it, leave my, my job at PayPal and go found Yotascale. And we did a lot of initial research and a lot of interviews and realized that this was actually a real problem at a lot of companies at scale.
Right. And so when you say that you were moving to the cloud, you were moving from an on-prem solution?
That's right, from a data center into the cloud in that particular scenario.
Right. And I know there have been various people who have talked about moving back to on-prem for a variety of reasons. And you've really touched on the baseline problem that when you outsource to the cloud, you don't have granular control over the resources unless you hire personnel who have an expertise in that field. And so the costs kind of magnify or amplify over time, right?
They do. I mean, I would state it slightly differently. I think actually you have a lot of granular control. That's part of the challenge, right? But
Okay.
every single piece of granular control that you have costs you money,
Ah,
right? So even an elastic IP is going to cost you money. Any single small service that you use, it costs you a ton of money, right? So it's like, you basically go into an all you can eat buffet, which you don't have the price for, right? Let's say
right,
that's the
right,
scenario. And then you got the hors d'oeuvres and you've got this and you got this snack and you got the ice cream. So yeah, I mean, all that sounds great. And you end up using it, you end up tasting it because it seems phenomenal. But when you are leaving the buffet, they tag you with a $3,500 bill. And so you're like, what?
like, by the way, you looked at the ice cream, therefore.
Yeah, you looked at it or whatever tasted, whatever the thing is, and you're like, well, I didn't
Yeah,
know it was going to cost me this much. And I mean, think about that at much larger scale, right?
right,
And I
right,
think that's part of the challenge. And repatriation is a thing and it can work for certain companies and it will be challenging for certain other companies. So you will kind of hear me try to give both sides of the
right,
story here,
right.
right? Which is like a lot of times what happens is that there is an echo chamber in one scenario and there's an echo chamber in another scenario, but you have to talk about the balance of it. So yeah, you can repatriate, but you also have to have very smart people running the data center. Running a data
Right.
center is not easy either, right? There's not a lot of innovation in data center, right? In cloud, there's a lot of innovation. If you want to go use Gen AI today, you want to use the most latest cutting edge technology, the cloud will offer you that. Of course, the price point you have to figure out, but you would have to go build that out in the data center yourself. And you would have to hire that talent and you have to train that talent. And so, anyways,
Right,
that's a
right.
whole other
But
podcast on its own.
right, right. But it does lead me into my next question, which is you've had great success in forming, leading, and driving teams forward to shared success. So could you tell us some about what your secrets are to creating high performing teams? I'm talking about kind of the people management side, because
Right.
clearly you're an inspirational leader in founding this company. You've been a great leader at PayPal. What are your secrets to being a great team leader?
Yeah, no, interestingly, it ends up being that they aren't secrets, right? They're common wisdom a lot of times, right?
Yeah.
People couch it as it's like there's something amazing secret that's happening, but a lot of times it's really common wisdom that you lose sight of, right? And I think first and foremost, I've had really good mentors that the people I work with, I learned from, and they happen to be first and foremost great human beings. I think that
Mhm.
is the most important element of what I would mention because people follow other people, right? Your title, your role, your skill, your job. I think those are important, but they're secondary. But at the end of the day, that human connection has to be there. And the question is like, what does it mean to be a really good human being? And I think the people that I learned from, it was a lot of the empathy that they had, the kindness that they had. They would take you under their wings, right? The mentorship that they would give you. And if you were going through a difficult time, that they would recognize that. And they would not look at business as business and personal as personal, right? They realize that you're always bringing your personal life into business, right? And you're bringing business into your personal life, especially in the times we live in. So I think it's building that trust is very, very important in those scenarios. So it starts with the people and that starts with how do you hire those people? And that starts with, well, what are the values that you really, really aspire to kind of build a team towards? I think that's a really important starting point. And I like the analogy that I believe Reed Hastings did on his Netflix manifesto. He mentioned that, teams, corporate teams, especially in a professional setting, they're like a sports team, right?
Mhm.
It's less like a family because, I can't fire my brother and, it's not
Right, right.
things like that. But the sports team analogy works quite well is because at the end of the day, you have a shared goal, you have a shared success, you have to win the game, right? In a corporate setting, it might be thriving and really getting the project done. But at the same time, you have to hold your position, right? Everybody needs to first understand what their position is, and then they have to hold it. And if they're not succeeding at it, then the coach or the quarterback, however the dynamics are within the team, can try to put you in a different position, right? So if you're
Mhm.
not working as a running back, you can be a wide receiver. And I think the other philosophy that I would just weave into it that's been very, very important in terms of motivation, right? Because the kind of work that I have done and my teams have done would be considered creative work, right? So yes, we're not writing the big novel, right? But at the same time, software writing is creative work, and it requires a lot of the same elements. And the question is, how do you motivate people, right? And I
Mhm.
think one of the seminal books that I really appreciated in my learning, and I learned this from my mentors as well, was Daniel Pink's Drive, which is
Hmm.
really talks about intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic motivation, right? Meaning that if you try to extrinsically motivate people by a bonus and by a job title, it can only go so far because at some point that doesn't really matter to people. But intrinsic motivation is something that comes from within, right? And I think that's where there are
Hmm.
the key pillars of mastery, right? So people want to be better at their work, at their creative endeavor. So a software engineer, a manager, like they just want to be better at what they do, meaning that they want to be considered the best at it. And then there is the autonomy, right? Nobody likes a micromanaging manager who's always breathing down their neck and always prescribing things and figuring out. So the question is, how do you treat people? How do we treat teams where you give them the right goals, but you give them a lot of room within which that they can really operate towards. So I think those are a lot of the key elements that have to go in to build high performing teams, to build teams that last, to build teams that don't just burn out. So I think those are some key principles that I bring into my thinking in terms of the people equation of it. And finally, it's always making sure that I am not under the illusion that I'm the smartest person in the room. That you surround yourself with people with diverse ideas, with who know a lot more in that particular field, and so you always have to be curious and learning from others, regardless of the reporting relationship. I think that's important.
Right, right. Well, over the past 10 years, you've built a pretty amazing success story. You've been a Gartner Cool vendor. You've landed some major customers with, let's see, Zoom, I think Hulu, some other major companies that are trusting your system that you've built. So tell us more about your success track and how you got there.
Yeah, it was linear, it's straightforward. It's step one, step two, and step three, right? Like the how
Piece of cake, right?
it's okay. So, I mean, I think, look, startup journeys are hard, right? And I think entrepreneurship is not easy. And it again goes back to the right people that are in the mix. And we've had an amazing group of initial customers who gave us a lot of, I mean, there are a lot of really good feedback, right? So building that relationship with them, making sure that they are helping us build the right product for the market, supportive investors, that's very important. So there's a lot of variables that go into building a successful company, right? But I think the most important part is company that is trying to land a customer like a Hulu or an Okta and others that you mentioned. At the end of the day, you're solving a problem that a set of people are experiencing, and you're maniacal about making sure that you have a solution to the problem, right?
Right.
At the end of the day, tech companies can always get distracted by building a bunch of features and just getting mired into that and not really thinking about, is this really solving a problem for a set of people, right?
Mhm.
And is this a solution to that problem? So I think it's a non-linear journey, as Scott Belsky has written a book called The Messy Middle, right?
Mhm.
It's the stuff that comes from between starting and then ultimate success. So it's really going to that whole alchemy of the messy middle, right? And
Mhm.
we've kept our ear to always what the customers are telling us, what the market is telling us, right? It's a very customer centric company. So at the node level, at even the engineer level, right? Even if you're a junior engineer in the company, right, you have access to the support channels. You have a responsibility in terms of being able to respond to those tickets. You get the opportunity to be in customer meetings, right? Because I think that's the secret sauce with respect to solving that problem, feeling that problem as a company, and then finding the right solution that solves that problem.
Got it. So, do you have any specific, like, customer, I don't know, battle stories about, maybe how you landed a customer or things that you think helped a customer to cross the finish line with you?
Well, it's every single one of them is a battle story when it comes to B2B enterprise sales,
Ain't
right?
that the truth? Yeah.
Especially this day and age. I mean, I think the overarching principle that I will tell you that has worked the best for me and us at the end of the day has been that empathy and has been that sincere, like, honesty, just to be very candid. Because I think there is a lot of people studying a lot of stuff out there today and saying a lot of things,
Mhm.
right? So we think of ourselves as a confidant, right? As a trusted advisor. And we are actually walked away from sales where we believe that the solution is not going to be the right fit for them. And we've told the customer, right? And it just happens to be the case that when that particular person went to another company when it was the right fit, right? They call us because they felt that, we were genuine and we really looked after their interest. But there's a lot of battle stories. I think one of them, like, what do they say, that you lose a sale like 3 times or 5 times before you really win it? So I think we've truly experienced that in a lot of cases. I think in one particular scenario early on in the company, it was like a Fortune 500 customer. We had done the whole technical POC. Everything was looking right. All the stakeholders were happy. And we were almost pretty much like celebrating the account. And then we had a signed contract. And then I got an email from their procurement saying that there was a mistake. The person who signed the contract was not supposed to sign the contract, and that they don't want to move forward with the sale. So you had like an high ranking officer in the company who'd signed the contract, right? And now you have, after the fact, the signed contract, procurement saying like, no, this, we can't do this. And you're like, hold on a second, what are you talking about, right? So I think there was a whole saga there where we had to go convince the CTO who had the signing authority, who we thought had been convinced, and we had to go through the sales cycle over again to talk about the value prop and all that. And we finally won the deal, right? So I think that was certainly one battle story that stuck out in my mind, because, losing a deal like that last minute when you put in all that effort on something like, well, they didn't have the signing authority when we kind of believed the date was one of them. Another one was where we had a high value contract on the line. We've done all of the work. I mean, remember, some of these sales cycles for enterprise can be 6 months, 9 months of a lot of effort that the company has put in. And our champion was happy. They wanted to move forward. And during the Christmas break, and I think sometimes these companies know, right? So they kind of like squeeze you at the last minute. It's the end of the year, right? It's end of the quarter. And they kind of threw in somebody in the mix who came in and started negotiating a discount, saying we need at least 50% when we'd already given them a hefty discount, right? Candidly, we're not making a ton of money on that, regardless of the fact that it was going to be high value contract, right? Because there's a lot of features and functions these guys wanted. And it was kind of interesting because the guy kind of talks to me and he's like, well, our CTO is saying that you guys are offering 20% discount where they're used to seeing 50%, right? So why aren't you offering 50% and this, that, and the other? So I had to be very straight up with him. And I said, like, listen, if you want, we could have given you a 50% discount and jacked up the price, right? And then you guys feel good about 50% discount. And we also said, like, look, if you really, really want that 50% discount, I can give you that. But I'm going to tell you that our mind is going to be in the deal, but our heart is not going to be in the deal. Because there's a partnership here. There's a lot of work we still have to do for you guys. And if you want to end up nickeling and diming us, that's fine, right? But just know that that's not how I'm going to be able to go motivate my team, right? Who's going to have to put their heart and soul into this. And it was a turning point. The guy's like, no, I get it. I understand. This makes perfect sense. I'll take care of it. So he was nice enough to eventually push through the contract, right? That way. But yeah, I mean, as I said, every single one of these is hard fought, and it ends up being a battle story. Just in the B2B sale, the value of the contract that we deal with. And you just have to stay even keeled, and have to stay sincere and genuine to the process, and just call it the way it is, and always be respectful.
Right. So being straight with your customer instead of playing fast and loose with the facts. Yeah.
Yeah, if you're fast and loose with the facts, or you're both playing a game, you go both, no, that's just a game, right? And it's just like, look, tell me what you really need, and I'll tell you what I really need out of it. And, let's sit together and figure out how do we make it work, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm curious if you could speak a little bit to your experience previously, prior to this company, when you were at PayPal or elsewhere. And I know that you experienced the pain and you thought, hey, I can solve this. But I'm also curious, earlier in your career, what lessons have you brought forward with you?
Yeah, I think a lot of the lessons that I learned through my career, especially in the startups that I was in, was back to what I was mentioning in terms of building the company, which is I was grateful to be in the company of people who were founders. And there was one company I was like employee number 3 or something, right? Something like that. And so I saw the building part of it up close. Now, it's not the same as being a founder, I will say that, right? Because it's a very different responsibility when you're in that. But I saw some number of things, right? One of them was that this whole notion of vitamin versus painkiller, right? I don't know if you've heard that, but it's basically a vitamin is something that you might need and you might decide to take. Like you might skip your vitamin D3, you might take it, right? So it's not essential to your day-to-day activity necessarily. But if you have a migraine, if you have a really bad headache, then an ibuprofen or an Advil is very important. I think that applies to building products as well. So you want to build something that is in high demand, that is essential, that is existential, that is critical to a lot of these teams and companies. And I saw examples in the startups that I was in where a lot of times the focus was on the vitamin, right? It was like a feature and it wasn't really a product, and there was a lot of effort that was being put into it. And not as much time was spent on customer discovery, being out in the field, being out of the building, talking to people with actual problem, validating that if this problem is solved, it can be monetized, right? There's money. In one scenario, I saw in one startup, a mid-stage startup, where they got defocused, right? There was a lot of money that they were being given in addition to the product, but also doing a lot of customization and integration. So they had this amazing talent. They were PhDs actually, right, in operations research and data science that ended up doing IT integration, right? Because the money was there and the company got defocused from its core value proposition, which was amazing, which is making a lot of money just because they could make some additional money doing that. So I think that's another example of a lesson where stay focused on the problem at hand, right? And even if it's hard to say no to things that are really not going to move the company forward, but it's going to give you some relief in the interim, say no to them, right? And just be disciplined in terms of your thinking. And those are hard things to do, but I was fortunate to have witnessed those and experienced those, and kind of bring those lessons into Yotascale as we were building the company.
Well, that's really great learning. Thanks for that perspective. Yeah. Well, so over the last almost 10 years that you've had the company in place, a lot of things have changed in terms of the tech industry. Most recently, of course, the advent of Gen AI and the use of LLMs to generate content. So I'm curious how what we're calling AI now, I kind of resist the label because it's such a broad term,
Yeah.
but I'm curious how that's changed your industry or your customers' needs.
Yeah, so it's changed in a couple of ways, right? So one is that we ourselves have started leveraging that technology, so LLMs and Gen AI, just to help with that solution, because we don't look at it as a panacea. We don't like spray it into it and call it Gen AI, and it's like, okay, now you're. So it's like we have a Yoda Copilot that can actually help you get to answers faster, right? So before you were living in this analytics world where you're clicking and into reports and finding those answers, and we made that part of it easy, right? So anybody who's a stakeholder at a company can come in, a CFO can come in and ask a question around, hey, what happened? Why did I get this bill shock last month? What are the key contributing factors, and how do I avoid it, right? Now you can get to that answer through a long-winded way of clicking, 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 and sifting through some TPS reports. You can eventually get to that, right? But what Gen AI does is accelerates because it has natural language understanding, and we've been able to train it for our domain, our specific domain, right? I think that's one in terms of our usage. The second piece of it is that it's actually made the problem worse when it comes to cost management, right?
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
have the typical cloud providers and you have the infrastructure providers like Snowflake and Datadog and all of that stuff, right? But now you have a lot of Gen AI usage, a la OpenAI, Anthropic, pick the one. And at the end of the day, it can cost you a lot of money, right? Because
Mhm.
you're running these models, people are doing this in R&D. So we have a value prop where we can help you monitor these costs, and we can also help you reduce these costs, right? Because at the end of the day, it's an extension of a problem that we have already been solving, right?
Mm.
And the problem is much worse because to some extent in the cloud computing world, it's kind of bounded. So it's like, okay, I'm over provision, but I know here are the servers I need. Here's a range of the servers that I need, what have you. But when it comes to AI and Gen AI, well, you just don't know how long it's going to take for it to yield the results that you need it to yield. How long do you have to train it? How long you have to do the prompt engineering? How long you have to keep at it, right? And that can mean a ton of money. So I think the CFOs are going to have a much worse heart attack, for lack of a better word, in terms of the bill shock piece of this in the next 12, 18 months, when a lot of these things are going to hit the production workloads, right? They're going to not be like a lab project anymore, but they're going to go into production. And we're also facing a supply demand crunch. So the problem is there isn't enough supply coming out of the likes of NVIDIA and others that can meet the demand. And a lot of the supply is being really taken up by the big guys, like the Facebooks of the
Mm.
world, the Google of the world, Amazon of the world. So for the rest of the people, the price point is going to only get higher, right? That's
So
what the supply demand curve does, right? So if there is a dearth of the supply, even more so, and that's going to make it even more important to be cost effective, right? To understand why are you spending this money. And the problem is if you don't leverage this new technology, you will be disrupted. You don't have a choice because new industries are going to be formed. So I think we feel that we're pretty well positioned as a player that focuses on cost management, right, to help the companies in addition to what we have helped them traditionally with, but now with all the AI and Gen AI, I guess, mad rush.
Yeah. Yeah. There really is a mad rush. It's a tsunami. Yeah.
Right.
Well, so what are your plans for next year for 2025?
Yeah, 2025, we have like on the roadmap a number of exciting things that we're going to be focused on. I mean, I think one of them is what we're calling the total platform cost management, right? So, as I mentioned, we've focused on the cloud providers. We've increasingly now focused on additional infrastructure like Snowflake and Datadog. And so, we're going to continue to make sure that we expand the scope of solving the cost management problem. And we're going to be constantly adding services to that are more, as you said, AI, Gen AI services, right? So we want to keep up with the demand that's out there for a product like Yotascale. And the second one is what I hinted to earlier. We are going to continue to leverage the LLM and the Gen AI technology in strategic key areas within our own product offering to reduce the friction for our end users, right? How
Mm.
can we make their life easier leveraging something like this, right? So and I know people are going to throw stuff at me by using this analogy and blah, 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 because they're purists and all that. But like, for example, when there was the advent of mobile, right, it made things easier for people, right, as opposed to doing things on a desktop. So there are scenarios and use cases that are sophisticated, but the scenarios where something like a Gen AI can make doing things simpler and faster and provide insights to you, in a much faster turnaround time than it usually did. And so I think we feel that FinOps and cost management is still stuck in the 90s spreadsheet analytics world. And our goal is to continue to unstuck it from that and just bringing into the 21st AI, Gen AI paradigm.
Great. Well, that's fantastic to hear. I have one last question for you. What do you dare to dream? And you can think about this question many different ways. What kind of future are you creating, or how do you dare to think the world could be?
Wow, that is $1 trillion question. Yeah, I think a lot about the next generation because I have 3 kids. And
Mhm.
I just want to make sure that we leave a place on a planet for them in many different ways and dimensions I'll come to that is better than we inherited. I know that sounds like a daunting task based on where things are at. But
Yeah.
I think if you're talking about daring to dream, certainly a more sustainable world, right, in many different ways. And that includes less consumerism, right? We live in a world where we just click and stuff just shows up at our door and the consumerization has been just tremendous. So just people being mindful and thoughtful of how much they consume just because the world is not equal. There's a lot of people around the world don't have enough, right? Certainly the climate change is top of mind if you look at what happened this year in terms of the weather patterns and things of that nature. And I think that is close to my heart because it is the flip side of the other coin of cost management, right? So if you are trying to make things more efficient and more resource efficient, then the flip side is that it's going to be more environmentally friendly, right? Because you're not spewing as much out in the air. So people don't realize that a lot of this cloud stuff doesn't live in a sky or a fake cloud, right? It's actually is a data center at some point in a machine that's running. So I think I really hope that the world comes together and recognizes the moment in time we're in when it comes to things like sustainability, right? And I understand that there is a balance between sustainability and economic growth and, letting businesses thrive and all that kind of stuff, right? And I think that's kind of beyond my paycheck. But at the end of the day, as a digital citizen, that's a key element. And I think world peace, right? I wish that there was more harmony across the world and more
Yeah.
kindness and more generosity and that people would back to that human being aspect of it, right? That would treat
Right.
each other as just at a human to human level, regardless of our differences. And the fact that you differ with somebody does not make you evil, it does not make you the other, right? And that you can still coexist and have a healthy discourse, regardless of what your viewpoints are.
Well, that's a really great vision to end the year on. Your episode is one of our last episodes for 2024. So thank you for that hopeful optimism as we go into the new year.
Absolutely.
Great to chat with you today. Thanks, and have a great holiday season.
You too. And early Happy New Year.
Likewise. Take care.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks to our guests today for their great insights on Dare, the podcast for innovators, entrepreneurs, and startup leaders. If you'd like your story to be featured on Dare, just contact us at info@darwaft.com. Dare is brought to you by Darwaft, the tech team that can make your vision a reality.